Good evening, Fredland Middle School. Shout out to the Triangle Tigers and to all of you at home. I hope you are having a wonderful day and are ready for another 2 chapters of the 39 Clues. We are on Book 4, Chapters 11 and 12. Big shout out to Scholastic for giving us permission to do this. We appreciate it, and I hope you guys are enjoying it at home. In our last 2 chapters, they had just gotten their hands on the saket from Grace that had been left with her friend Hillary, and now they are heading to the Valley of the Queens. Let's get started. I thought it was Nefertiti, Amy said, trying to stall. Theo shook his head. Different queen. Queen Nefertari, favorite wife of Ramses II. He ruled Egypt for 66 years during the 19th dynasty New Kingdom from 1279 to 1213 BC. Dan laughed. Everywhere they went, it seemed he got a lecture. Nefertari's tomb wasn't discovered until 1904 by the Italian archaeologist Ernesto Schiaparelli. It was closed for a long time, about 30 years, because the wall paintings are so vulnerable. It was carved out of limestone, and the reliefs were damaged by water, humidity, and salt. Then it underwent a massive conservation effort back in the early 90s. Now it's regarded as the most beautiful tomb in all Egypt. But I don't understand, Hillary said. You can't take anything out of a tomb. Why do you have a map of it? It's hard to explain, Amy said. There might be a message for us there. I see, Hillary said, even though she clearly didn't. A kind of game? Exactly, Amy said. A sort of scavenger hunt. Wacky family, huh? Dad said. Well, you could have a problem, Theo said. The paintings are still so fragile that they limit access to the tomb. Very difficult to get in and have a look. I might be able to blag my way in. Why don't you let Theo be your guide down to Luxor, Hillary suggested. My doctor has forbidden me to travel. He's such a fuss budget. I'm only 79, but Theo will be a perfect guide. He's led tours down the Luxor many times. He knows every inch of the valley. Let us help you, my dears. For Grace. I could do nothing for her in her final illness. Let me do this. I'll ring and make the plane reservations right now. Dan nodded. All right, Amy said. Hillary looked at the saket. I have a suggestion, dears. Now that you found your note, you might want to put her back in the bank. She's too valuable to tote in your luggage. I'd be happy to do that for you. Amy reached for the saket. She wrapped the statue back in the soft linen. She zipped open her waist pack. The saket fit perfectly inside. Thanks anyway. I'll keep her with me. Hillary was probably right, but somehow Amy couldn't let go of the statue Grace had wanted them to have. Not even for a day. There was so little she had left. The jade necklace and now this. Grace had reached out and sent them something. She didn't understand where Grace was leading them or why, but she wasn't about to let it go. The sun had barely risen when Hillary knocked softly at their door. They ate a hasty breakfast, and Hillary gave them another hair-raising ride to the airport. She offered to watch Saladin while they were gone. Don't fret a bit, ducks, she said, as Saladin hissed at her. I love felines. We'll get along just fine. The airport terminal was hot and crowded. They stood in line waiting for their boarding passes. The flight to Luxor was a little over an hour. They would be there mid-morning if it left on time. Amy felt like the crowds were pressing in on her, making it hard to breathe. So many people pushing their way to ticket counters and gates. She clutched Grace's guidebook. She looked through it last night before going to sleep. It was clear that Grace had used the book on many trips to Egypt. Amy could tell from the different inks Grace had used. She dated her trips on the inside cover from the 1960s through the 90s. Most of the entries were about cafes she'd liked or the names of drivers she used. Many of them had been crossed out. Amy wondered why Grace hadn't just bought another guidebook. Anyway, there was no message in the margin like, here's where you'll find Catherine's clue. There had been one ink color that looked fresher. She looked inside the cover, but it wasn't dated like the others were. Amy had thumbed through the book until the type had blurred, looking for notations in that light blue ink. She'd fallen asleep with the book next to her on the pillow. Theo led them to their gate. They stood to the side, watching passengers disembark from a flight from Rome. Suddenly, they heard a commotion. Yo, my man! In the usual, I get an escort off the plane. The fans, they have a tendency to adore the wizard. They spread the love and it can get just a little too real. You know what I'm saying? Dan groaned. Oh, no. Amy pulled him behind a pillar and gestured frantically at Nellie. Theo followed them curiously. They peeked from around the pillar. Jonah Wizard stood with his father and a tall woman in a uniform, part of airport personnel. Check out that mob, Jonah Wizard said. Those are the passengers awaiting the next flight, the woman said. They could hear the clank of Jonah's gold chains as he turned back to the attendant. Solid. We've got some lead time, but as soon as I step foot out there, there's going to be pandemonium, a go-go, for shizzle. A go for, excuse me, sir? I'll be calling your superior about the lack of crowd control, Mr. Wizard said, and I can't access my BlackBerry. Do you know that young gentleman? Theo asked in a low voice. I wouldn't throw the term gentleman around, Dan said. It might hit him and some manners might stick. Don't you know him? Amy asked. He's a huge star in the U.S. At Theo's blank look, Nellie said, you know, get your groove pants on, turn back the feet of time. He makes my funk go fresh. Are you speaking English? Theo asked. We're talking street, Dan said, except it's Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. Theo held up his hands. Help, I need a translator. He's a big fat phony, Dan said flatly. That's all you need to know. Amy decided to leave out the fact that Jonah was a Cahill and a cousin. First, she'd been totally thrilled to find out that the famous hip-hop star was actually related to her, part of the Janus branch of the Cahills. Jonah had accepted the 39 Clues challenge. Of course, it was easy for him to walk away from $1 million. Probably spent that much a year on tips. Jonah swept out into the waiting room, sunglasses on. He held up his hands in order to ward off requests. There weren't any. Send a porter for the bags. My limo will be at the curb, he told the attendant. I'm sorry, sir. You'll have to proceed to baggage claim. Jonah looked startled. I don't do baggage claim, Mama. The bags come to me. My name is Miss Sinati. I'm sorry, sir, if there's nothing else. Don't you know who I am? Behind Jonah's back, the attendant rolled her eyes at the other attendants at the desk. Frankly, no. Jonah looked stricken. He took off his sunglasses. Dad, he wailed. Don't worry now, Jonah, his father said soothingly. Obviously, here in Egypt, they aren't aware that you're a global brand. You mean nobody knows who I am? Now, Johnny, just calm down. I'm sure that they don't know that I'm the bomb. An older woman swiveled. Did someone say bomb? Messinati spoke rapidly into a walkie-talkie. Security, we've got a 50510. Oh, man, Dan said. Did they just say the wrong thing or what? We better board our flight, Amy said. I have a feeling Jonah's going to be stuck in interrogation for quite some time. Security, my mans! Jonah held out his arms. It's about time. If you could just surround me on the way to the limo. I'm sorry, sir, the security man said. He took his elbow. You'll have to come with us. No touching, Jonah said. I don't accept the touching of the merchandise. Another security guard took his other elbow and they lifted him off his feet. Daddy! Amy and Dan giggled as the security guards force marched Jonah and his father away. I haven't seen anything so funny since that TV weatherman farted in the middle of the forecast, Dan said gleefully. I hope they keep him in detention for at least a year. Excuse me, a polite young Egyptian man stood next to Dan. For you from a friend. He handed Dan a note. Who was it? Paid $30 bakshish. Bye now. Young man ran off before they could ask anything else. Dan unwrapped the note. It was a drawing of a long tool. What's this? Dan asked. A hoe? It's not a gardening hoe, Theo said, glancing at it. That's an ancient Egyptian embalming tool used during the mummification process. They used it to get the brains out of the bodies. Up through the nostrils, jiggle it about a bit until the brain liquefies and pours out the nose. Cool, Dan said. My sentiments exactly. They didn't preserve the brain like they did the other organs, though. The lungs, stomach, and intestines were removed and each placed in a different canopic jar. Wow, Dan said. I'm impressed. Way to go, ancient dudes. A friend of yours sent the message, Theo said. Rather amusing, I suppose. Yeah, Amy said. Hysterical. Chapter 12. As they wound through the streets of Luxor, Dan started to feel like Egypt was the oven and he was the turkey. He was glad when the cab drove down a small lane to dock and he could see the green water of the Nile. He didn't feel any cooler, but it was better than looking at sand. Where are we staying? Amy asked Theo as they all grabbed their bags. Theo paid off the driver. He pointed with his chin to a small, trim, white sailboat sitting low in the water. There. Whoa, Dan said. A boat? That rocks. Exactly, Amy said, and it doesn't stop. She'd never been crazy about boats, and it hadn't helped that she almost drowned when she'd been thrown off of one into a canal in Venice. These boats are called dahabiyas, Thea said. Do you see the smaller sailboats out on the river? They're called feluccas. No trip to Egypt is complete without a Nile cruise on a felucca. My friend said we could stay for a couple of days on his boat while he's in Cairo. And maybe after we go see Queen Nefertari's tomb, we can go for a swim in the river, Dan said. It's Nefertari, and whatever you do, don't swim in the Nile, Theo said. There are parasites, worms that can make you very, let's say, uncomfortable. The larvae penetrate the skin, and of course there's the occasional crocodile. Okay, you convinced me, Dan said. Come on, let's take our gear aboard. The cabin was trim and spare and gleaming. There was room for 2 people to sleep in the bow, and the seating area made up another bed. Bookshelves lined the sides of the cabin. Theo said he'd sleep on the deck to watch out for crocodiles, he said with a wink. Now, he said, I have to go see about those passes to the tomb. Might take a little persuasion. You'll want to take a rest later when it gets really hot, but you still have time to explore the valley a bit. Where would you like to start? Amy thumbed through Grace's guidebook. On plain, she noted that Grace had outlined the site with light blue ink. She said not to miss the temple of Hatshepsut. Brilliant. Both sites are on the Thebes side of the river. Theo looked at Nellie. How would you like to see a real archaeologist's office? Really? I love it. Dan rolled his eyes at Amy. They had never realized that their smart-mouthed au pair was so capable of being a girl. He practically got an airsac watching them share their bags of peanuts on the plane. He wished Nellie would go back to worshipping her iPod. Let's stroll down the Corniche and I'll put you 2 in a taxi, Theo said to Amy and Dan. Nellie and I will meet you at Hatshepsut's temple in exactly 1 hour. Then it's off to the tomb. I can't believe Theo said that it isn't hot yet, Amy said. How much hotter can it possibly get? She was about to grumble more, but ahead of her, an incredible sight was rising in the wavy desert air. The temple of Hatshepsut sat at the foot of the towering cliffs. It was built in 3 tiers, with columns marching along the front. A series of ramps and stairs led up to it. Isn't it amazing, she said. Which part, Dan asked, the sand or the sand? Here we are walking on ground that people walked on thousands of years ago. I was reading in the guidebook. Dan held up 2 crossed fingers. Lecture alert! That this temple was designed by the Queen's architect, Senenmut in the 18th dynasty. Later, it was damaged by Ramses. I guess he wasn't a fan. And it was even a Coptic monastery for a while. They're still excavating parts of it. I think we should go right to the reliefs of the Queen's journey to the land of Punt. Look at what Grace wrote. Don't miss these. Even back in the New Kingdom, a queen had to go Christmas shopping. Where's Punt? Dan asked. Is it next to Pass and Hike? No one knows for sure. They think it's present-day Somalia. Hatshepsut led an expedition there. They came to the wide ramp, which had shallow stairs in the center. The heat bounced off the pale stone and pounded against their bodies. The pale yellows and beiges of the sand and the cliffs turned everything into a pulsating shimmer. Amy was glad Theo had insisted they wear sunglasses and baseball caps. The glare was binding. As they ascended, Amy felt more and more transfixed. It made her dizzy heat and blue sky and cliff and the grandeur of the statues and the columns. There she is, Amy said, pointing to a statue of Hatshepsut. Whoa, she has a beard, Dan said. The queen is a dude? She called herself king, Amy explained. So sometimes she's portrayed with a beard. Whatevs, Dan said. I still think she needs a shave. Come on, I think the wall reliefs are on the second tier. Consulting the guidebook, Amy stopped for a moment. Dan tried to peer over her shoulder. I think we go right, Amy said. No, left. Right, then left, then right again. And turn and kick and jump. Are those directions or cheerleading routine? Dan tried to grab the book. Let me see. No, I've got it. I haven't even seen it yet. Amy wrenched the book from Dan's grasp. I don't want to lose it. I'm going to lose it all right, Dan muttered darkly. Amy hurried ahead. She didn't want the book out of her sight. Grace's messages were in there, and even if she couldn't figure them out, she didn't want Dan spilling soda on the pages or forgetting the book in some cafe. Dan scowled as he trudged behind her. Amy kept looking up at the massive walls and checking the guidebook, anxious to find the exact spot. Suddenly, she stopped and pointed. There. This is right where that picture of Grace was taken. She stood where Grace had been standing and struck the same pose. I don't get it, Dan said. A bazillion years ago, a queen goes to Punt. I don't see what that has to do with us. Hey, look at that. He pointed to a short, squat figure. Amy consulted her guidebook. That's the Queen of Punt. She gave the gift of myrrh trees to Hatshepsut. I don't care. She should still lay off the falafel. Why did Grace lead us here? Amy wondered out loud. What is she trying to tell us? It's so frustrating. At least she's trying, Dan said. She finally left us something to go on. She left us the salad and hints so we'd know how to open the statue. Only the two of us would know about that. I guess you're right. Amy looked out over the valley. Then along the line of tourists heading up the sweep of the ramp, she picked out two figures straggling behind. Look, she cried, it's Jonah and his father. Oh no, Dan groaned. I was hoping they'd stay locked up for at least an eternity. Suddenly, the glare made them feel exposed to every eye. Dan and Amy looked down at the tiny figures of Jonah, and his father suddenly stopped. Jonah sat down right on the ramp as if he was too hot and tired to take another step. His father bent over, obviously trying to urge him to get up. Where's Theo and Nellie? Dan wondered. They should have been here by now. Amy felt a shiver of alarm. Let's go look for them. They headed up to the next terrace. As they reached the top of the ramp, they saw Theo and Nellie standing by a column. We've been looking for you, Nellie said, even though it seemed to Amy that she and Theo had been standing there holding hands. I have bad news and good news, Theo said. Bad news, Nefertari's tomb is closed. Bummer, Dan said. The good news is that Theo is amazing, Nellie said, giving Theo a starry-eyed gaze. You should have seen him in action. He gets to the main top guy, some big whoop archaeologist, and starts talking about how he's writing this book, and the guy is so impressed with how brilliant Theo is that he gives us a pass and says we can visit the tomb. Pure genius. You're exaggerating. It was nothing, Theo said. Don't be so modest, Nellie said. It had nothing to do with me. It was because you were so charming. Hello, Mutual Admiration Society, Dan said. Tomb? Righto, Theo said. We better go now before he changes his mind. Is there a back way? Amy asked. I'd like to see some stuff the tourists don't see. I always know the back way, remember? Theo asked. But don't forget this, when it comes to tombs, there's only one way out. Okay, we have a few rules to follow, Theo said. This tomb is in very fragile state, so absolutely no cameras, no flashes, no flashlights. Once I open the door, the lights will come on. You'll be able to see, but it's not very bright. The frescoes must be protected at all costs. Watch your step on the stairs and don't touch any of the walls. And when I say it's time to leave, we go. We have 10 minutes. Agreed? They all nodded. Theo swung open a heavy iron door. He disappeared into the tomb and they followed down the narrow stairs. The air was cooler as they descended and smelled of dust. Amy heard Dan cough. She hoped the close air wouldn't aggravate his asthma. Theo spoke in hushed tone. The tomb was found empty. Robbers had stolen everything long ago. But this tomb has a greater treasure. They stepped into the first room. Amy sucked in a breath. Colors jumped out at her, alive and beautiful. Reds, golds, greens, blues. There. That's Nefertari. Her name means the most beautiful. The figure wore a transparent white gown with a wide golden collar and earrings in the shape of flower blossoms. She's beautiful, Nellie said. Totally want her jewelry. Look up, Theo whispered. Over their heads, the ceiling was painted a deep blue. Golden stars were painted in a few swift strokes. Row after row, it made Amy feel dizzy. The tomb is designed so that Nefertari says goodbye to life as we descend, Theo explained. He led the way down a flight of narrow stairs. Various gods greet her and help her on her journey. The final room is the tomb room. They walked past other wall paintings, vivid and beautiful. That's Osiris, Theo said, pointing, god of the underworld, husband of Isis. When we enter any tomb, we enter the world of Osiris. They passed through into the burial chamber. Here, Isis leads Nefertari to the underworld, Theo said. Look how tenderly she holds her hand, and how she places the Ankh, the symbol of eternal life, against her mouth. Amy had forgotten about the clue. It was hard to focus with so much color and mystery around her. She was in the center of an ancient world, and all she could do was turn around and around to gather in as many images as she could. Our 10 minutes are up, Theo said. But they can't be. We just got here, Amy said. Time stops down here, doesn't it? But we have to go. Did you find what you were looking for? No, but it was amazing, Amy said. How could she pick out a single hieroglyphic or a drawing? Everything was ancient, existing thousands of years before Catherine Cahill was born. Catherine must have seen this tomb, but must have walked through and been stunned by its beauty, just as they had. How could she have left something here that she knew would be found? She wouldn't have left an object. Her guides were tomb robbers, so she knew that objects wouldn't be safe. Amy gave a last glance behind as they climbed back up in the air in sunlight. What did you leave, Catherine? She wondered. As they returned to the boat, they saw the white paper fluttering on the mast. What's that? Amy asked. Maybe it's a takeout menu, Dan said. Do mummies eat pizza? They jumped aboard and walked closer. Nellie gasped. A piece of paper had been attached to the mast with a lethal-looking knife. The blade glinted in the sun. They stepped closer to read the message. Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of those who sleep. This is way too creepy, Nellie said with a shudder. Theo extracted the knife and crumpled the paper. Must be the locals trying to scare us for their own amusement. Amy didn't think so. But what does it mean? She asked. It's the Pharaoh's curse, Theo explained. A silly superstition, that's all. Anyone who violates a tomb will suffer a terrible and untimely death. It's all the stuff of horror films, really. Totally juvenile. Juvenile? Dan looked at Amy. Jonah, he mouthed. Nellie sprang to set out the lunch they'd bought on the way home. Could we not talk about mummies' curses before we eat? Really bad for digestion. Dan and Amy sat down on chairs out of earshot of Theo and Nellie, who chatted while they ate. So Jonah knows we're here, Dan said. Amy scooped up some baba ganoush with the flatbread called Aish Marara. You're right, it's probably him. It seems like his style. He'd rather follow us than figure something out himself, Dan said. But what is it? Amy squinted at her plate. Some kind of eggplant, I think. No, what were we missing? We're the 39 clue list. There has to be a reason why Catherine Cahill led us to that tomb. Dan had memorized Catherine's dumb poem. Now he went over it slowly in his head. He sat up. Hey, remember under ancient stars, step by step to mine? We thought she meant the sky. What if she meant the golden stars on the ceiling of the tomb? Amy cried. Step by step, Dan said. We looked at everything on the walls, but did we examine the steps? We have to get back in that tomb. And that's the end of chapter 12. Oh boy, what did that message mean? What's on the steps? Gonna have to tune in next time for another 2 chapters of the 39 Clues. Have a wonderful night, and I will see you tomorrow.